We will now discuss the most scandalous post within the entire Imperium. But not only this, we will explore the exact moment in history when the veil of bureaucracy was lifted to reveal the Imperium for what it truly is: the Emperor of Mankind's dictatorship. The pompous, self-aggrandizing lords who collectively form the High Council on Terra have been a mainstay within 40k lore for decades now, and they are a facet of the fluff we are all quite familiar with. It wasn't until the return of Primarch Guilliman that these corrupt individuals were culled and put to the sword, in the first real shake-up the High Lords have received in the lore since the days of Ghosh Van Dyer. It likely will not shock you to learn that political alliances and even plays for power have been commonplace within these positions almost since their founding. Almost. In fact, there once existed a High Lord of Terra, one so devoted to the people that they would sacrifice all they had accumulated in their lifetime: power, influence, a life of luxury, all for the betterment of Terra's citizens, who deserved better than to toil under yet another dictatorship, another warlord, this one who crowned himself emperor. In the beginning, however, the Imperium had no need for High Lords, for it was but one of a handful of burgeoning empires. One small territory lost amongst brutal, continent-spanning kingdoms such as Ursh or the wicked, corrupted Nordic territories. But we know the Emperor of Mankind has always been the centre of influence around which all else orbits, and so utilising his, as well as his companions' talents, this empire would begin to grow. Although there was always Malcador and Valdor, and with the Emperor they were the triumvirate of power, which would unite a planet which had known nothing but anarchy for millennia. Subservient to these three during the early days of unity, only the likes of minor generals were required. The title of High Lord would not be realised for centuries yet. In these early days of unity, several formal, more antiquated titles would begin to reappear, as did more gifted trades such as the artificer or scientist. But as the Emperor's army slew warlord after barbaric warlord, the need for a ruling administration would be realised. First, the Imperium's people numbered hundreds, then thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and so no one man, emperor or no, could hope to rule such a numerous populace without the aid of a dedicated governing body. During this turbulent time, the age of strife, for those in the know, to amalgamate people who had suffered under the heel of ruthless warlords or roving cannibals was a gargantuan task. Trust did not come easily, and in the early days of unity the Emperor was simply one warlord of many. No, the only way to ensure civility was maintained across so many previously oppressed peoples was to establish an administration. The first appointments made were called the Magisters Temporal, and as the Emperor's armies of veteran soldiers or Gene-Hans Thunder Warriors marched to oppose the next enemy, it was these officials who ensured taxation was adhered to and security maintained. They were each responsible for a province of newly conquered territory. No small task considering the barbarity of those times. The Emperor's plans are nothing if not expedient in their execution, however, and soon the rank of Magister Temporal was supplemented by a regional Lord Civilian, one who would take the responsibility for the ever-expanding collections of provinces, all together forming the nascent Imperium. If there was ever an illustration of how quickly the Emperor's forces overcame the many horrors of old night, once a firm base of power was established, it is the fact that this new high rank of regional Lord Civilian would only persist for 70 years, before again becoming ineffective in the face of such a far-reaching empire. So rapidly was the Imperium growing that its civilian government just could not hope to maintain adequate logistics, policing, infrastructure, or even food. This time of expansion, often remembered as a golden era of unity, was in fact marred by food riots in Asia Majoris and even currency runs in the Endonsing bloc. Everywhere throughout this new empire was either civil unrest or sedition. Not even the Emperor himself could curtail the evaporating control throughout his kingdom, for he was required on the field of battle or otherwise was enveloped in one of his many scientific programs. No, the task of reigning in humanity's unruliness would fall to others, particularly one who has always enjoyed the benefits which operating within the shadows confers. Once the foundations of the mighty imperial palace were laid down atop the lofty heights of the Himalayas, Malkador the Sigillite himself would draw up the initial precepts of the Lex Pacificum. This master works would outline anew the standards of governance upon humanity's cradle world. The office of Lord Civilian would become the second tier of command, overseen by 4 High Lords Civilian. Unlike traditional governance across the globe, these 4 new stations would not be responsible for separate geographical domains. They would instead be tasked with overseeing a particular area of governance. These 4 officers were thus: Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Armies, the Master of the Administratum, Chancellor of the Estate Imperium, and lastly, the highest ranking of the 4, Provost Marshal of the Divisio Arbites. By the will of these lords would Terra steadily be pulled from its millennia-long stupor during the Age of Strife, and ever so slowly, even painfully onwards, into an age ruled by logic and science. It must be stressed, however, that the station of High Lord was ever subservient to the whims or wishes of the Emperor of mankind. To believe godlike beings such as the Emperor, the Sigillite, or even the Stoic Captain General would obey the wishes of mortals is a belief founded in foolishness, or even worse, ignorance. By the time the office of High Lord was founded, little opposition stood upon Terra to reject the might of the Imperium. Now the mistake made by many during this time was assuming or believing that the Imperium was slowly building towards a democracy. Many thought the Emperor's intention was to bring unity to Terra's people once more, before relinquishing the dictator-like office he had been forced to uphold for so long, handing the reins of rulership to the freed peoples of Earth. Though as the years passed, the Emperor's personal grip upon Terra's rulership only tightened. He may not have been present in person always, not even residing within the halls of his own palace, but the stamp of his power stretched from one end of the globe round to the other. Banners of the Raptor Imperialis flew in every township, whilst the hard arm of the law was ever present to punish dissent, especially now that the Sigillites' Lex Pacificum more efficiently distributed the responsibility of governance. Even though Terra's peoples made a slow return to order and even civility, the masses were far too unreliable to determine such an important task as forging a democratic state. No, the Emperor was dictator, and the High Lords played the civilian face of an administration whose true goals were known only by the Emperor himself, though likely also by the Sigillite. Whilst the Emperor visited the gene cults of Luna, Amar Astarte secretly oversaw the creation of the first rounds of Astarte's soldiery. The highest-ranking High Lord, she who held the rank of Provost Marshal, would form an alliance with a handful of surviving Thunder Warriors to resolutely stand against the Imperial dictatorship. She was Uoma Kandawire, once a child orphan who had fled her parents' compound in southeast Afrique, then risen by her own merit to the loftiest civilian office on all of Terra. Kandawire would be the first High Lord of Terra to go against the grain, as it were, and make her own mark upon a world of billions. Not for her the underhanded scheming which came so naturally to her 3 counterparts, Noam Retraver, Pelops Dravagor, or Cleasan Weya. Kandawire, whose responsibility was the implementation of all law and suppression of civil eruption across the planet, would challenge the Emperor's dictatorship. Upon discovering the truth of the Thunder Warriors' disappearance, she would secretly recruit an army totaling thousands of souls, even complemented by 24 Thunder Warriors. Through her and Primarch Ushatan's efforts, hundreds of regiments and numberless mercenaries, all of whom owed allegiance to Terra's people and the ideals of the Imperium rather than the dictatorship which ran it, gathered to oppose the Emperor's regime. Unfortunately, they would come undone when attempting to siege the Imperial Palace whilst it was still under construction. Alone confronting this army of thousands, Constantine Valdor would converse with the People's Army, whilst the earliest Astartes recruits belonging to the 1st Legion flanked them, mercilessly ending the majority of those present, including the Thunder Warriors and their Primarch Ushatan. Kandawire was allowed to flee though, founding a quiet life for herself and her retainer back home in southeastern Afrique. This is but the first scandal to plague the office of the High Lords, for in the years to come, mankind would venture deep into the stars for the first time in millennia. If the political situation upon Terra was brutal, once the Imperium encompassed entire sectors, it was nigh uncontrollable by 4 lords alone. Now let's briefly explain how the posts within the High Lords Council on Terra changed over the years before we detail the more scandalous events which plagued these esteemed lords. Harking back to the days prior to and during the Great Crusade, the importance of Terra as the throne world of mankind meant that the small planet was quickly growing as the centre of all administration within mankind's galactic empire. Considering the ever-evolving situation, new worlds being brought into the fold, as well as total war on numerous fronts, the positions, as well as duties, of those who would rule Terra were instead taken over by individuals whose intellect was capable of this arduous task. Those responsible for the rulership of the ever-expanding Imperium of Man were collectively known as the War Council. The Emperor, Malkador the Sigillite, Karl the Fabricator General of Mars, Constantine Valdor, the Primarchs, as well as various high-ranking officials integral to the Imperium's function, such as the Paternoval Envoy, the Master of the Adeptus Telepathica, and even high-ranking generals, all were at one point or another a part of the Imperium's War Council. Its initial purview was to plan and execute the Great Crusade, though once Horus was named War Master, the Council's agenda took on the shape of a more aggressive, strategic gathering. But of course, Horus was not War Master for long before being corrupted by the Dark Pantheon, and so the Imperium's rulership would again be required to adapt. Upon the newly founded Terran War Council was a marked absence in the Emperor of Mankind. Malkador the Sigillite, Rogel Dawn, Constantine Valdor, and lords of high standing, individuals of great esteem who ruled such institutions as the Imperial Army, the Adeptus Arbites, and even the Silent Sisterhood, all would unite in this galactic crisis to defend the realms of man. All those who spoke in this council were listened to, a courteous respect shown by all, a practice this council's latter year appointments would have done well to continue. And with tactical situations constantly in flux, invariably ad hoc reports or discussions would be necessary, so not all members were present for each convened meeting. Now, following the Horus heresy, we begin to see the Lords of Terra take shape in a way that is recognisable within the current era 40k. Of course, some of the greatest intellects humanity contained were either deceased, disappeared, or otherwise attending to more pressing matters, and so it fell to Rabute Gilliman to reform the Imperium's ruling body in such a way that a galaxy in flames had the greatest chance at being rebuilt. With Rabute appointing himself Lord Commander of the Imperium, he reinstalled the office of the High Lords of Terra once more, providing the Imperium with, especially at that time, a sense of humanity steering mankind after so many years of transhuman brutality. And so have the High Lords existed within this state for near on 10,000 years, though there has been at times ebbs and flows regarding the number of seats, as well as the official positions granted within the High 12. Perhaps one of the greatest political intrigues in Imperial history occurred in mid-M32, when the Master of Assassins, Drakan Vangerich, became so disgusted by the self-interest of the High Lords that he chose to act. This was during the calamitous time known as the War of the Beast, a dire sequence of wars resulting in repeated losses for the Imperium against the Orc warlord known as the Beast. In a time when urgency and unity were required from mankind's leaders, instead the situation only lifted the veil to reveal the High Lords for the utterly useless self-aggrandizing sycophants they were. Some even vetoed surrendering Terra to the whims of the beast, simply to preserve their wretched lives. Vangerich would scheme to ensure the Master of Assassins was recognised within the High 12 once more, for its chair at the 12 had been replaced by a different post some time prior, but once in power, the mental state of the man deteriorated whilst his disgust for his compatriots grew steeply. It is worth noting, before we unveil the ultimate fate of Drakan Vangerich, that during this time, the last living Imperial Fist Astartes, named Karl Slaughter, appointed himself as a Lord Commander. Quite an amusing time, really, for not only was Slaughter quite adept at keeping the High Lords on task, but he also personally executed the despicable head of the ecclesiarchy within the High Lords' hallowed meeting chambers, as well as denouncing the Emperor's divinity. Following the final successful campaign against the Beast's armies, Vangerich would be appointed Lord Protector of the Imperium. This was a temporary statement of power handed over from the current Lord Commander, an Astartes named Maximus Thane. This is because Thane was needed elsewhere in the galaxy at the head of a newly founded Imperial Fist chapter, in order to eradicate as many remaining Orc holdouts as possible. But whilst Thane was playing the dutiful warrior, Vangerich's hateful misgivings of the Terran High Lords would see him raise a bloody coup. He dispatched his Assassinorum operatives to eliminate every one of the High 12, except one female he had grown attached to over the years of political manoeuvring and joint work when rallying the Imperium against the Beast. Vangerich's rule was a particularly bloody one, with his mental state declining whilst his paranoia steadily increased. Chapter Master Thane would gather to his banner 400 Astartes from 3 different chapters, and in a cataclysmic battle lay siege to the throne world itself, eventually slaying Vangerich. For a few millennia at least, the structure of the High 12 would remain more or less unchanged. Which organisations held power at the table of the High Lords, of course, was a fluid thing, but that has always been the case within that council. It would not be until the rule of Goj Van Dyer during the disastrous time now labelled the Age of Apostasy that the High Lords would again be overruled by a madman, with Goj Van Dyer's bloody rule finally being challenged by the likes of Sebastian Thor, as well as many Astartes who recognised all too well how much power Van Dyer wielded. The man's fate was sealed, again during a siege on Terra. It isn't until the return of Guilliman that we experience a proper, efficient culling of the High Lords once more, except the Primarch would not have assassins complete his work. Upon awaking from stasis, Guilliman would be appalled at the backward, devolved theocracy the Imperium of Man had become, but was also enraged by those who served as its head of administration. Some he would judge having failed their duty so utterly the only punishment could be death, whilst others were simply stood down from their favourable posts. The current state of affairs within the 41st millennium, however, certainly risks the Council returning to old habits, for even though Guilliman has firmly instated those he believes he can trust, the Primarch has elected to lead his crusade, crossing from Imperium Sanctus into Imperium Nihilus, a realm from which it is impossible to communicate, and therefore monitor, the honesty of the High Lords. But do you believe we'll see yet more high-profile political manoeuvring affecting the wider Imperium? Whether initially appointed by Guilliman or no, if there's one thing we can be sure of within the Imperium, it is that corruption runs rife, and those with power profit. The most recent posts which we know without a doubt currently sit on the Council of High Lords are in fact Abbess Sanctorum of the Sororitas, Fabricator General of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Master of Assassins, Head of the Ecclesiarchy of course, Lord Commander Sola Leontus, and an Inquisitorial Representative. Now I'm sure there's a more comprehensive list within the Watchers of the Throne series, but honestly, it's been years since I read those, so I can't remember it now, I'm sorry. Likewise, I'm reluctant to use material from sites online such as Lexicanum or 40k Fandom, as I prefer to do my own research and reading, so I know what I'm speaking to you about is true and correct. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the High Lords of Terra, let me know by leaving a like, a comment, or even subscribing, as all those actions help support our young channel. If you're looking for 21% off Warhammer and modelling tools, simply visit our link to Gap Games in the description. They're a great bunch of blokes and it really helps out the channel when you use our link. Don't forget we also like to catch up on Discord, speak about the lore and what we're modelling or painting. So if that sounds fun to you and you want to be a part of the channel as it grows, follow the link below. It will be great to be able to dedicate more hours each week to creating content. So if you want to aid in controlling the subjects of our videos, having your chosen name displayed in every video, or even receive high-res artwork from the talented artists of the 40k community, follow the link to our Patreon, which is in the description. As always, thank you so much for listening, take it easy, and have a good one.